Hey, listeners, and welcome back to Some World, a fiction podcast by your host, Ben Vaker. This is episode number 4, and so far on the podcast I've dealt with gender relations in ancient Greece and cannabis policy. Now, these are hard-hitting and complex political issues, so I figured it's time to lighten up the mood a bit. As we all have at some point, I was thinking about what it'd be like to leave everything behind and move to a deserted island somewhere. And so I wrote this short story. It's called Paths for the Pathwayer. Try saying that if you're Swedish. And it works best if read in a British accent. So I hope my fake British is as decent as my fake Americana. And if you want to support my work, and if you like to read, you can spend $3 on my Kindle ebook Way of the Chronic on Amazon. If you perchance would wish to donate, you can do so on LiberaPay. Link in the low bar of whatever platform you're listening on. Any amount is greatly appreciated. So take care and enjoy Paths for the Pathwayer. She sent me a picture on Instagram. I had been working as a consultant for charity organizations and humanitarian movements for a few years, using my degrees in computer programming and social anthropology to get people to donate more to charity while adopting more charitable and humanitarian values. It is quite possible to direct human behavior, influence people's actions and values in subtle ways so that when they think they are acting out of free will, they're really only following a path that has been laid out for them. When you are the one laying out the paths, and you've been doing it for a long time, you start to wonder if there is someone or something that lays paths for the pathwayer. The job paid extremely well. So well, in fact, that I could soon afford a 4-room apartment in Mayfair. I would spend the days at trendy cafes doing Skype conferences, and the evenings doing research in my study, a window always ajar to catch the sounds of the city nightlife. A bird often came by and chirped by the windowsill, but it would always disappear before I had made it there to see what kind it was. After a couple of years, I had developed a constant nausea, vomiting several times a week as if poisoned. Despite this, doctors could find nothing particularly wrong with me, and deemed it stress-related. I tried antiemetics and antihistamines and a number of natural remedies like peppermint oil, ginger, fennel, cinnamon, cumin extract, but nothing worked. It eventually became such a common occurrence that I simply stopped paying attention to it. I started feeling dread. I had moved up career-wise, even doing consultant gigs for nations and multi-billion-dollar corporations, but my constant work had alienated me from my family and friends, and the nature of my work had caused me to grow a strong disdain for the civilized world, always trying to help everyone but always ending up doing nothing but making everything worse for everybody. They lay paths they think will lead a certain way, but are unaware how the path they follow affects the path they lay. People don't understand. Even less do they understand that they don't understand. Helping one person means not helping someone else. Helping both means not helping someone else in turn. Helping neither is not an option, since not helping always helps someone. You can help everyone only when they are totally isolated from and unknown to each other. I suppose it's a human thing. Me and my thoughts. Despite the roomy apartment, I felt like a prisoner. I started playing around with the idea of moving elsewhere, but I couldn't find a suitable place. I spent sleepless nights trying to figure out a good spot to relocate to and escape my impending nihilism, but no place provided me any sense of meaning. One night, after a couple of shots of bourbon, I was playing with my smartphone when I heard the bird by the windowsill. Drunk, I rushed to the window to finally catch a glimpse of it, but it had gotten away yet again. I stared out the window at the starlit sky and had a sudden impulse. I snapped a picture of myself and posted it to Instagram with the caption, "Best answer to this question gets my Mayfair 4-room apartment. I'm looking for a better place. Where should I go? Post this pic and tag me." When I woke up the next day, I had forgotten all about it and was quite surprised to find myself tagged in over 1 million photos. For some reason, I wanted to see the first reply first, so I scrolled to the top and saw a selfie of a woman with a sign that said, "Home." I picked her immediately and disregarded all else. I messaged her, telling her to stop by whenever she felt like it. "So why did you choose me, Luke?" she asked the first evening in her new apartment, while we were drinking bourbon in the kitchen. In the day, I had transferred ownership of the apartment to her. I said she could have all the furniture, which she did. "Because you had the right answer," I replied. "I need to go home." "So where's home?" she asked. "Maybe I'll need another Instagram contest to answer that question," I said. We laughed. I confided in her that she had actually been the very first entry into the contest. "Maybe that's precisely why," she suggested. "You wanted someone to go first." We drank more and looked at some of the other entries. There were many posts like, "Into my heart, baby," posted by generic Instagram babes, and stubbled men in flannel shirts posting things like, "I hear Cleveland's nice this time of year." I ran the post thread through word recognition software and found that no one but Susi had posted home. "What do you think about this?" she asked when she was sitting with my phone as I poured more bourbon. She held the screen out to me. "Anywhere but Oxford Street." "I know what that means, but I don't find it particularly funny," I said with a deadpan face, and she rolled her eyes while shaking her head and sighing with a click. I asked her how she had thought of her answer. "I don't know," she replied and shrugged, holding up an arm in a questioning pose. A bird whispered in my ear. I asked about her story. She was living in, or had until now, Croydon, working as a nurse. The hours were long and the pay bad, but she found fulfillment in helping people. That was until she started getting sick for no apparent reason, throwing up all the time. At first, she said she thought she was pregnant, but quickly ruled it out. I told her about my own recurring nausea. "Huh," she sounded pensively and said, "Maybe it's the air." At the end of the evening, she turned to me. "You can stay in my apartment," she said with an ironic chuckle, "as long as you need to find out where home is." After 2 years, we had developed a deep relationship and quickly understood that we would be together for a long time. Wherever home was, it was with her. With my ties to the humanitarian industry, I did not need to pull many strings to find her a better nursing job closer to the apartment. I told her she only needed to work as much as she could handle, considering her sickness. "You're sick too," she replied. "Does it make you work less?" "Yes," I said, "but I only sit and talk to people half the time and sit and think the other half." Then I did start working less and spent more time trying to find my elusive home. By now, we had so much money that we could travel the world, vetting site after site and crossing them off the list. Like me, Susi was not only physically sick, but was also sick of the dysfunctions of Western society, and civilized society in general. Her job had jaded her as much as mine had me, and we soon started building a shared fantasy of erasing our lives and starting anew in a new world. The more we talked, researched, and queried, the realer the fantasy grew. We spent a lot of time camping in the Scottish Highlands, dressed in parkas and enjoying the trickling rain and the warmth of each other's embrace, discussing and planning our future by open fires. During this year, my father passed away, leaving me a shockingly high inheritance. His death was tragic, but his contribution greater than anything he did for me while alive. "Susi," I said one evening while staring off into the never-ending landscape of hills, the sky as gray as steel. I was grilling a frankfurter on a stick and told her, "I want us to fake our deaths and go live somewhere far away." She started laughing, then said, "Yeah, let's go live on a secluded island somewhere." I realized she wasn't humoring me or being ironic. "Would you want that?" I asked sincerely. She looked at me for a long time, then said, "Only if we never come back." We stayed in the apartment for another year while we made the final plans. The coming split from those close to us was not without concern. Neither was the duplicity in planning to stage our deaths without their knowledge. But we figured it was for the better. If they knew we were alive, they would start looking for us sooner or later, and would probably find us wherever we happened to be. We took boating lessons and bought a solar-driven yacht big enough to transport several tons of food, fuel, appliances, and materials. among them generators and medical equipment for emergencies. The pseudo side involved yet another boat, a few days on a small rocky island near Tasmania, and our phones left on a cliff, from which we presumably would have fallen to our deaths. It also took a fair amount of bribery, which obviously entailed a certain risk, but we figured that neither had we committed a crime, except for acquiring forged passports for crises of some kind, nor were we running from anyone in particular, so by the time of some eventual revelatory course of events, we would be long gone, so to speak, and not a priority. We ventured further on the South Pacific, way past Pitcairn Islands. We inspected many small islands in the area, even one with people on it. It looked to be a village of no more than 50 individuals. We couldn't make sure, since they made threatening motions with their arms, pointing with bows and arrows, signaling for us to stay away. "Do I smell that bad?" I asked Susi. She laughed and said that it was probably more of a personality thing. It was a strange time. It felt like we were shedding our skin, becoming an isolated symbiotic organism, a different state of being. There were moments of slight panic where either of us would start to consider the implications of what we were doing, but the other one was always there to comfort and reason. Many nights we drank bourbon and looked at the stars, listening to the birds, never running out of things to talk about, and we both felt that our nausea was decreasing. We penned a handwritten note each, stating that if something were to happen to us, we wished not to be brought back to civilization. In the beginning of our journey, I had steered the yacht most of the time, but she found it entertaining and gradually took over the controls. She controlled the vessel with more determination and will than I. It was almost as if she had a destination clear in her mind. We had been at sea for 4 months, the smell of civilization fighting for each moment, when we headed into some chaotic waters, where giant waves and wind whipped ceaselessly. Despite the risk, Susi took us right through the chaos, where we soon reached a small archipelago where a strange formation of high cliffs surrounded a lagoon consisting of 5 small islands, the biggest one in the middle and the others surrounding it. Sighing in relief, we got off on the center island, admiring the turquoise, glowing water and the richness of the vegetation. Apart from some elusive tropical bird species hiding in the trees, there seemed to be no other animals on the island, at least not large enough to observe. "You know," I said to Susi, "we are probably the first humans to set foot on this island." She nodded. "I'm not leaving this island," she said, and walked into the forest. "I think it's this way," she said. We went into the thick jungle, noticing how quiet it was and how still the air felt. All was quiet apart from our footsteps in the grass. "I feel like we're in an adventure novel," she said. "Which one?" I asked. She rolled her eyes, shaking her head and sighing with a click. Suddenly, a boy stood in front of us. He could have been no more than 15 years old, dressed in shorts and sandals. He pointed further into the forest. "Home," he said in broken English. I looked at Susi. She was as amazed as I was. It wasn't without concern that we followed the boy deeper, and soon reached a village of 25 people. There were huts built around a strange little protrusion in the center, a tennis ball-sized slab of some black type of rock I had never seen before. My internal compass told me that the slab was in the dead center of the island. They were very friendly and welcoming. The boy we had met first, Machua, as I came to find was his name, followed me back to the yacht to fetch food that I would impart upon the people as a gift. They built a hut outside the circle, and it was clear that they wanted us to stay there. We soon learned that they called themselves the Beto people, an outbreak group of the Bina who lived far away. Differences in belief had made them relocate at some point in time, and they were flourishing. Vegetables, roots, and medicinal herbs were abundant, and they were situated so far off that they were totally undisturbed by other indigenous peoples or Westerners. Past the village there was even a small pond that was so rich with fish that food was never an issue. The pond led into a cave behind a small waterfall. Susi would often sit by the pond, looking at the waterfall in the cave. More than often, actually. Whenever I needed to look for her, I always found her by the pond, distantly staring at the waterfall in the cave. We started learning their language, bit, as we taught them English. and within a couple of months we could communicate effectively. There were some cultural differences to overcome, but knowing their language, I had soon figured out the psychology of the Beto. They were an extremely laborious people, constantly working. If they weren't fishing or gathering, there was always a hut to be repaired or improved upon, clothes to be patched or sewn, tools to be crafted or food to be prepared. Anything that was not work-related was of no interest to them, and they learned English simply to facilitate mine and Susi's initiation as contributors to the community. Machua was different. He learned English considerably faster than all the others, and followed me around wherever I went, asking me to tell him stories of civilization, gaping in awe at every detail I shared with him. His father was gone, and I quickly developed paternal feelings for him. He became my protege, and my best friend apart from Susi. I asked Machua about the stone. Dark stone, he said, and told me that the village had been built around the stone because they believed it brought them luck. Well, don't we all need it? I asked. Within months, Susi had been initiated into the Women's Council, where the females of the village would meet to discuss issues that needed to be relayed to the leaders. Perhaps there was need of an expedition into the cave to find metals for producing tools and utensils. Or perhaps a woman had gotten pregnant and needed help, but wasn't ready to speak about it with the father yet. Susi, kind and empathic as she was, took on the responsibility with candor and seriousness, and our pillow talk often consisted of her telling me inspiring human stories about the goings-on in the social dimension of the village. It was lovely, although I can't say I stayed awake for all of it. It took another year to fully readjust to the new mode of life. The days seemed endless and most tasks were of a material and immediate nature. Both of us soon noticed that our nausea was gone. In our spare time, Susi and I would, upon her enthusiastic, almost obsessive request, explore the cave. We found it to have many corridors and chambers, and it went quite deep. Susi told me that she knew that the cave led to the center of the island. How can you be so sure? I asked. A bird whispered in my ear, she replied. Susi, convinced as she was that the cave led somewhere to the center, wanted to find the dark stone to see how far down it went. It was easier said than done. I didn't know if it was due to the complex path or something else entirely, but our internal compasses were thrown off each time we went down there, and we kept getting lost, forced to follow back the yellow rope that attached us to the outside. Until one day, when I went to meet her for lunch and found that she was not in our hut. I thought she was sitting by the pond, so I went there to greet her, but she wasn't there. I understood then that she had gone alone into the cave. I jumped in and followed the yellow rope she had attached to her wrist. It felt like I had been running for hours, when suddenly the appearance of the cave started changing. The floor and walls grew darker, and peculiar, radiant vegetation covered the walls. I soon realized that this section of the cave was made of the same material as the dark stone, so I reasoned that this part of the cave was, in fact, the dark stone itself, stretching out from above like a twisted gazebo. I found also, to my surprise, that birds were chirping in the cave, and the deeper I got, the more they chirped. I suddenly found myself in a rather large chamber. In the center, a pillar shot through the ceiling. Susi lay by the pillar, limp, lifeless. I took off her rope and tied it to a stone. I then picked up her body. Before I left, I looked at the dark stone. It gave off a dim reflection, fleeting, as if its apparition was processed by something other than one's eyes, some unknown sense. In the village, I brought her to her hut and attached her to a portable respirator. Then I sat by her bed and waited, in complete denial. I did not believe her mind was gone, but that she would reawaken if only she got proper care. I ruled out returning her to civilization. The trip would be too risky, and I would be betraying her wish if I did. It was clear then that I had to go by myself, to bring a doctor back to the island. I left Susi under supervision of the villagers, Machua being quite apt at maintaining the life support system. I didn't sleep for the whole trip, keeping myself awake with brandy. I arrived at Mangareva, paid off the authorities and got on a plane to London, using a fake identity. I did not revisit friends or family, but discreetly got in touch with former business associates who managed to put me into contact with Russell Kahn, a retired medical doctor and scientist who had behind him a long and prestigious career, both within medicine and as a human rights advocate and environmentalist. I visited him at the retirement home where he was staying. His room was dark, stuffy, and rather unkempt. I felt there was no time for manipulation, so I was forthcoming, telling him everything exactly as it had happened, about the pseudocide, the Beto, the cave, and Susi's condition. I told him that I would give him the rest of my money if he would join me to the island to see if there was something to be done. I handed him a note of disclaim. He stared at it and told me he needed a little time to think about it. He wasn't sure how long, but he'd get back to me. 2 days later, he invited me back to his room. He looked sincerely at me and said, "I'm sorry I took so long. I know it's an urgent matter, but this is no minor decision." "Of course I understand," I replied. "I will help you," he said. He explained that he was terminally ill and only had a few years left. His wife had passed a year prior, and he just wanted something interesting, consuming, to take his mind off the pain in his final years. "And as far away from this room as possible is preferable," he said. Dr. Khan took another day to say farewell to the few people he had left in his life, telling them simply that he was going on a trip and might never return. We flew to Australia and made our way past Pitcairn and onward on yacht. The journey was strange. I was constantly struck with memories of Susi and going past the very same islands, recalling moments lost to time. Khan was very talkative and I tried my best to humor him, but I spent most of the time in silence, with a glass of brandy in my hand. We arrived in the early morning, 2 months after our departure. Machua had heard the boat from afar and was already awaiting us on the shore. He awkwardly greeted the doctor and told us on the walk through the forest that Susi's condition had not changed. We hastily upgraded the infirmary with equipment we had brought along, and Khan started running tests on Susi. First, he wanted to determine whether she was brain dead, or if there were signs of a persistent vegetative state. He attached her to an EEG and concluded that she was entirely brain dead. "I'm sorry," he said, but almost immediately shifted focus to the EEG. Something had registered. The number display read 5313000. 5313000 of what? Neither of us could understand. "That's quite strange," he said, and looked at the graphic display. Some disturbance. He inspected the display further, zooming in and out of areas. "That's quite strange," he repeated. There was no organ function, he explained. No respiratory function. She was brain dead, but this one time, it was like a field that passed through the brain, lighting up certain areas, and then shut them off again. He did not know what was being activated, or what activated it, and he was perplexed by this as he had studied the human brain extensively throughout his career. "It's like some part of her brain was jolted by a pulse from somewhere," he said, shaking his head. We decided to wait for another reading. Machua joined us and we all sat by Susi's bed, staring at the measuring devices. The birds in the trees chirped on. Pulse 2 came about an hour after the first one. We watched as the EEG lit up. The display said 5317000. Khan blinked twice and thought for a while. He picked up a calculator from the table beside Susi's bed and struck its digits. "These are neighboring primes," he said. "First 5313000, now 5317000. If that is somehow correct, the next number should be 5331000. Whatever implication came of this, neither of us understood it, but we stayed by the bed, waiting for the next pulse. It took 4 hours. As Khan had hypothesized, the number on the next reading was indeed 5331000. "What's going on here?" he asked. "It follows primes, whatever that means, but there seems to be no discernible time pattern. And why these primes?" Machua jumped out of his seat. "Seconds," he yelled. Khan and I looked each other in the eyes. We both knew what the boy meant. Calculating, we found that it had gone 31 minus 17, 14,000 seconds, or about 4 hours, since the last number had showed. Before that, there had gone 17 minus 13, 4,000 seconds, or roughly an hour, since the first number had showed. I had found Susi about 2 months, circa 5,300,000 seconds, prior to that moment. Whatever the pulse was, it was sending its signal every prime number of its duration in seconds. We celebrated Mature for his discovery, and thought further. The next pulse would come in second 5,349,000, or 18,000 seconds, 5 hours. I told the doctor that I believed this had something to do with the Darkstone. I had told him this when we first met, and he had seemed rather skeptical. Now he was more open to the idea. Open to any idea, rather. "So you think it's the Darkstone that sends these pulses?" he asked. "I don't know," I said, and suggested I would take him to see the pillar in the cave chamber. Then we would synchronize timers and he would go back to the EEG, while I waited to see if something happened to the pillar at the moment the EEG registered a number. Mature would observe the top of the Darkstone from the village. Following the rope I had left last I was there, we made our way toward the dark pillar. I remarked on the increasing chirping of the birds, but he said that he couldn't hear anything. "Probably a dead frequency," he said. "I'm old." An hour later, when we had entered the chamber, Khan approached the pillar cautiously. "Yes, like you said, this looks to be of the same material as this whole part of the cave," he said. "I've never seen anything like it." He advised me not to touch it. Then we synchronized and started our timers. We nodded to each other, and Khan left the chamber, holding on to the yellow rope. I sat down and kept observing the Darkstone. I wondered if I should touch it. I was pretty sure nothing would happen. The more I stared at it, the more compelled I felt at putting my hand against it. Finally I did, and, as suspected, nothing happened. Somehow I knew that it would interact only during a pulse. During the hours that passed, my eyes shifted between the Darkstone and the timer while memories of Susi rose in intensity. First from weak flashes of images of her face, words she had spoken, a bird whispered in my ear, and special moments, to sequences, to scenes, and finally to a presence so strong that I felt as if she was down there with me. When the timer struck 0, the Darkstone seemed for a short moment to lose its dark hue, turning into a transparent something, some unimaginable soft, sap-like crystalline complexion. The chirping was amplified to the extreme, and I understood that those had never been birds. I had heard them, and she had heard them. They were somehow coming from inside our brains. I instantly knew what I was supposed to do. I was to put my head against the pillar for optimal transfer. I was drawn to it by some strange force, acting as a magnet. For the short moment the pulse had emitted, I had to put out an incredible amount of willpower to withstand the pull. But I did, and backed away from the pillar, turning and running back through the cave. There were 9 hours until the next pulse. Back with Khan and Mature, we established that the pulse had indeed occurred at the same time in all 3 locations. There was no question, and it came as no surprise. Susi remained unchanged. I held her hand. Her skin was cool. I told Khan about my experience. Susi was pulled to the Darkstone, I said in confusion from not knowing how these thoughts had formed in my mind. She put her head against it, and she was transferred. Khan frowned. "Transferred? What do you mean?" "I'm not sure," I replied unhelpfully. "I think her consciousness, whatever you want to call it, was transferred to the Darkstone somehow." It took a long moment of staring into nothing for Khan to accept it. I watched how his face changed as he realized that he had to entertain the possibility that something almost unimaginable was going on. "So her mind is in the Darkstone, then," he said, shaking his head after he had said it. "I believe so," I said. We spoke more on it. If there was some force attracting us to the Darkstone, it made sense, if any of this did, that Susi had been so drawn to seek out the cave. Perhaps she had previously been unable to pinpoint the location exactly. The signal could have been too weak or unstable, or too short in duration for her to find it instantly. Or maybe there had been no pulse at all before Susi transferred herself, but she had somehow felt its presence anyway, by some other, even stranger force. So if her consciousness is in the Darkstone, Khan said with a tone that suggested he couldn't believe he was saying this, then the pulse perhaps interacts with her brain somehow, as if her consciousness is all around us, but her brain is the only thing that can register it. There might be some unknown force interacting with ordinary matter. Hence the reading on the EEG, I said. We speculated wildly, but of course no questions were answered, only reproduced. If I felt the force as well, why didn't I feel it as strongly as she? Would Khan or the villagers feel it if they were in the chamber when the pulse hit? Was the chirping a signal, or some trace of one? Why the pattern of primes? I offered Khan some brandy, which he accepted. He sighed and said, "You know, I think there are things here that are impossible for the two of us to ever comprehend fully." He looked at me candidly. On the one hand, I think we should go get help. This could be a discovery that would change everything. On the other hand, what is to become of the Beto if we bring civilization here? What will become of the island? I turned to him instinctively. The world must never know of this island, I said as if stating a simple fact. He thought for a moment, then nodded. I agree, he said, and looked at the timer. It's about 6 hours to the next pulse. What are your thoughts? I trust you, I said. I should take you back. I'll leave you by Mangareva and you can make it by yourself from there. When I come back here, I will transfer. Khan immediately objected. I'm not going back, he said, and his tone made clear that there was no use pressing the issue. He then turned the conversation to me. But are you sure? He asked. We have no idea what will happen. I did not have to think long, hardly at all, for my answer. When I'm gone, I said, the villagers will know what to do with our bodies. I'm going to Susi at the next pulse. And so we agreed, and I sat with Susi for a while. The villagers and Khan then walked with me to the pond, where we said our farewells. I hugged Mature extra hard and told him to keep learning with the doctor. Whatever's in there, or out there, I hope you'll enjoy it, said Khan. I nodded and smiled and headed for the Darkstone. I spent my last hours sitting on the cave floor, my back leaning against the pillar. I tried to reach some understanding of what was happening, but my thoughts were scattered and not much seemed to make sense. It didn't really matter, though. The only important thing was that I would, in some way, be reunited with Susi again. Yet despite however strongly I felt for her, my love was not the primary driving force behind this need. It was something deeper. Deeper than psychology, deeper than biology, deeper than chemistry. It was a field and I was suspended in it. We were suspended in it. I thought of the first time she came to my apartment, and all the years that had passed since, but the force overwhelmed my sentimentality. It was the transfer that mattered, not the human emotions, not the memories. As the last few seconds ran down the timer, a part of me, the human, was fearful and anxious. The other part, whatever it was, calm and ready. As the pulse hit, I bowed my head to the pillar, and in what took fractions of a second but felt like an eternity, my consciousness left my brain. Language and reasoning went first, and all that came after were intuitive notions, scattered images and impressions whose meaning diminished while I was sensing them. Earth forms. Darkstone, matter from home. Formation of Darkstone, gross with earth. Darkstone matter spread. Ancient Darkstone in our genes, Luke and Susi. Beto served the Darkstone. Darkstone falls. Time to go home, Luke. Poison. Darkstone sends birds inside brains. Luke asks where, birds tell Susi. Susi is more Darkstone than Luke. Susi is a key. Susi knows home. Susi opens Darkstone. Susi goes first. Luke goes home. The end.